The prairie wind howled across the wide-open valley, carrying with it the sharp scent of sagebrush and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. But Colton Hayes, a lone cowboy who had seen more dust and blood than peace, noticed something unusual on that morning ride. A shrill cry, high-pitched and terrified, cutting through the stillness of the desert like a blade. His stallion, a dark-coated Mustang with fire in his eyes, twitched his ears toward the sound, and Colton pulled the reins tight, scanning the horizon. Then he saw it, against the backdrop of craggy cliffs. A massive golden eagle swooped and thrashed in the sky, its talons sinking into something struggling, something small. His sharp eyes caught it at once, a child, dangling precariously in the predator's clutch, screaming in terror. Blood rushed hot in Colton's veins as instinct took over, and with a kick to his horse's sides, he raced forward, heart pounding, dust flying in his wake. He raised his rifle, balanced it with the precision of a man who had hunted for survival, not sport, and in that heartbeat of eternity, he pulled the trigger. The shot echoed like thunder across the valley. The eagle shrieked, its wings flapping in fury, and released its prey, the tiny form tumbling through the air. Without a thought for his own life, Colton spurred his horse forward and leaned from the saddle, catching the child against his chest before she hit the ground. He reined hard, dust choking the air, heart racing with the weight of what he held. A little Apache girl, no more than 7 or 8, trembling and wide-eyed, her dark braids tangled, her small hands clutching at his shirt. As if it were the last solid thing in the world, she whimpered, her voice broken but alive. Colton steadied her, murmuring low words of comfort, words she might not understand but could feel in his tone. He looked into her frightened eyes, and something inside him, something he thought long buried, stirred, a need to protect. He had saved lives before, but this was different. This was pure, fragile innocence. Before he could even gather his thoughts, the sound of pounding hooves reached his ears, and he turned to see a group of Apache riders cresting the hill, fierce and proud, their faces painted, their bows and rifles drawn, their eyes sharp with suspicion and rage. They had seen him, a cowboy with their child in his arms, and to them it was not salvation they saw, but threat. Colton raised his free hand slowly, lowering his rifle to the ground, his every movement deliberate. "Easy now," he muttered under his breath, knowing full well they couldn't hear his words, only read his intent. He placed the child gently on her feet, keeping his palms open to the riders approaching fast. The girl cried out in their tongue, her voice weak but urgent, pointing to the sky and then back to Colton, and in that moment the riders slowed, exchanging glances of confusion. The leader, a tall man with stern eyes and a hawk-feathered spear, dismounted and strode forward, his hand hovering near his weapon. He crouched by the child, listening as she spoke rapidly, pointing again at the cowboy. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Colton stood his ground, steady as stone, though sweat trickled down his brow. Finally the Apache leader rose, his gaze fixed on Colton, unreadable. With a sharp whistle he gestured, and 2 of the riders flanked the cowboy, their presence heavy with warning. Yet there was no violence, only silent judgment. Then, from the back of the group, a woman stepped forward, tall and graceful, her long raven-black hair cascading over her shoulders, her eyes burning with both fear and gratitude. She knelt to embrace the child, clutching her so tightly Colton could almost feel the relief radiating from her. The child buried her face in the woman's neck, and only then did the mother's eyes rise to Colton's. For a long moment, time itself seemed to stop as their gazes locked. Her eyes, dark and glistening, carrying both suspicion and a spark of something else, recognition of the miracle he had just delivered. She rose slowly, her chin high, and spoke in her native tongue, her words melodic but edged with power. The leader turned to Colton and translated in broken English, his voice heavy with meaning. "She says, you saved her daughter. For that, she owes you a debt no man can repay." The mother stepped forward then, her hand resting on her child's shoulder, and looked Colton in the eye as if testing the truth of his soul. Then she spoke again, her words sharp, deliberate. Translated a moment later, she says, "She offers you something greater than gold or land. She offers you her trust, and something else that will change your path forever." Colton's heart thundered in his chest, for he had come to these lands searching for nothing but quiet work and maybe a place to belong. But now, by the will of fate and the wings of a wild eagle, he was standing at the edge of a story he never asked for, one that would alter his life in ways he could not yet imagine. That night, beneath the starlit dome of the desert sky, Colton Hayes sat by the Apache campfire, feeling the weight of eyes upon him, every warrior measuring the worth of the white cowboy who had saved their child, every whisper laced with doubt and curiosity. And yet he remained still, respectful, his hat resting on his knee as flames cracked and shadows danced across painted faces. Across from him sat the mother, her daughter pressed safely against her side, and though she had not spoken directly to him since that moment in the valley, her presence was unshakable, like the gravity of the earth itself drawing him in, her gaze sharp, unflinching, but carrying that same strange spark he had seen before, a spark that unsettled and stirred something inside him he had long buried. When the leader of the band finally spoke, his voice was gravel and steel. "You have done what no man of your kind has ever done. You have spared blood, not spilled it. For this you are no longer stranger tonight. You are guest." With that, food was placed before him, roasted venison and cornbread baked in the coals, and though the other warriors did not smile, their nods carried reluctant acceptance. Yet it was the woman who leaned forward, her hand brushing her daughter's braid as she spoke with sudden, startling clarity, her English broken but strong. "You risked life for child, not your own. That makes you different." Colton raised his eyes to hers, steady but cautious, for he had lived long enough to know that in these lands every word carried weight like stone, and he replied simply, "Any man worth his salt would have done the same." At that, a small smile tugged at her lips, fleeting as a desert breeze, but enough to shift the air around them. The girl, shy but fearless in her innocence, crawled closer to Colton, placing her small hand on his arm, her dark eyes shining with a trust so pure it nearly broke him. The mother said softly, "Her name is Naya." And in that moment, the bond was sealed between cowboy and child, between man and fate. Hours passed, the fire dwindled, and yet the mother remained beside him, speaking of things he did not expect, how her people had lost many to sickness and to war, how trust was a rare currency, and how fate had delivered her daughter back from the claws of death through his hands. Then, with a voice low enough that only he could hear, she gave him the offer that would echo through his life. "You have no tribe, no family here. Take us as yours, and we take you as ours." The words struck him harder than any bullet ever had. A woman of strength and pride was offering not just thanks, but a place, a home, a bond, perhaps even love. For a moment Colton's heart warred against itself. He was a drifter, a cowboy who lived by the saddle and the rifle, who had never belonged anywhere since the war took his brothers and the frontier took his peace. And yet here, in the quiet, firelit glow of a people he had been taught to fear, he felt a belonging he had never known. He looked at Naya, at her mother's fierce eyes, at the warriors who, though wary, had given him bread and fire, and he realized that the life he thought he was chasing, one of solitude, was a lie. The truth of his soul was clearer than the stars above. He wanted roots, he wanted meaning, and here, in this unlikely place, he had found it. The choice before him was not of land or wealth, but of destiny. He drew a slow breath, his voice low but steady, and answered her offer with words that bound his future tighter than iron chains. "If you'll have me, I'll stand with you. No man nor storm will take me from it." And in that moment, the woman's stern mask cracked, her eyes softening with a shine that was not just gratitude, but hope, the fire of a new beginning. From that night forward, Colton Hayes was no longer just a cowboy. He was protector, brother, perhaps one day husband. a man reborn not by the land he roamed, but by the love and trust of a child. And her mother, who had given him what he thought he had lost forever, a reason to live and a home in the wild world of the West.